Hello folks, what's them otherwise? Even if you tell them there's no evidence, they will not be convinced by any evidence or any contradictory information that might suggest the theory is made up. I say this because I know a few people who I admire in many respects, who are highly educated and in many respects are fairly, decent people. But a couple of them hold conspiracy theories, which I'll talk about soon, especially about anti-vaccinations and viruses. And these people, know how science operates. They know what evidence means. But all of that is for nothing for them. They can't be convinced otherwise. This is a big worry for me, and I've often wondered why it is that people hang on to these theories despite even evidence against them. One of the problems with conspiracy theories, I think, is they can be quite destructive. They can be quite dangerous, as we will see. Here in Australia, for example, where I am, we like a lot of other countries had to deal with the height of the Corona-19 virus plague. Now, the government acted, I think, very responsibly. It promoted vaccination. We had 3 or 4 different types of vaccinations available, and vaccination was free. You were encouraged to get it, and it was eventually quite easy to get a vaccination. However, despite all that, there are quite a few individuals and groups also who believe that vaccination itself was a conspiracy. This is in relation, of course, to the coronavirus, but some people are against vaccination of all sorts. And why they're against them is even more confusing. The claims that are made about why they're dangerous are somewhat absurd and irrational. Mainly it is that the companies that manufacture the vaccines are seeking to destroy, are seeking to corrupt people with their vaccines. The vaccines are said not to work, but their side effects certain side effects are deliberately incorporated into the vaccine to damage the body, so maybe they can sell more drugs or something like that. Anyway, there's so many different reasons given by people who are against vaccination that it's rather worrying, in fact. I just want to also add another example that's intriguing me. It relates to the Trump trial in New York just recently, where Trump was found guilty by a jury of 34 felony counts, for a very reason, guilty of all of them. Now, his reaction was really sort of predictable, but worrying. I mean, he in a news conference after he got found that he was charged with all of these, found guilty of all of these 34 charges, he claimed, first of all, he was innocent of the charges. He claimed that the trial was rigged. He claimed that the judge was corrupt. And the Biden administration, Department of Justice in the United States, was against it. Now, this is sort of unbelievable, but he said it, and one wonders he might have been talking to a particular crowd to do it. He said little about the jury, and these were 12-person jury panel of peers, his own peers, and he had some part, his group had some part in selecting the jury and rejecting some. So even the jury must have been corrupted, one might add. He gave absolutely no evidence for these absurd claims, which, were absurd on the surface of it all the time. He simply made the assertion and didn't give any backup, didn't provide any information that would sort of support it. He probably did it in the knowledge that his devoted supporters would accept anything he said, which is probably true, so that this was a sort of statement, if you like, to the choir, which is not much good for everybody else. I would just want to talk a little bit now about what makes conspiracy theories, if you like, so appealing, so convincing to certain individuals. And eventually I just want to have a look at what can possibly be done to counter their effect on the problem. It appears, I think, and that is with the assistance of the internet, that conspiracy theories have increased quite a lot. There's quite a lot of them. Now these include conspiracies about the World Trade Center, like absurd claims that it was America bombing itself that I've heard when I've travelled abroad. The coronavirus itself was deliberately man-made to wreak destruction on the human race. And the vaccine itself, the vaccine manufacturers, as I've said, had some addition to the vaccine which had side effects, which obviously, the story is to make people buy their drugs more often. There's also conspiracy theories about global warming, the death of Princess Diana, and back in the 60s, the Kennedy assassination was a famous conspiracy surrounding that. And of course the 2020 election, that Biden won over Trump. Trump claims that he actually won it, and that the companies that supplied the voting machines rigged them to support Biden, a whole range of really absurd claims. In fact, it went to court a number of times and was rejected by the courts. Now, I just want to start by saying there are probably two types of conspiracy theories, if you like. The first one is I call carried out by a malicious intent, powerful groups, working secretly behind the scene to bring down other groups or to bring about certain outcomes to certain people who are seen as enemies of their interests. So the major feature is a conspiring, secret, powerful group of people in some back room, as it were, working out how to promulgate information that would achieve their goals. The other type of conspiracy theory is a little bit different, and I thought I'd add that. And that is certain minority groups in the past and in our history have been seen as destructive to the social order. And all sorts of conspiracies and mistruths about these groups have been spread and believed by people. That is an old age thing of that so certain races, certain ethnic groups, certain certain countries, whatever, are seen as sometimes subhuman and sometimes as ultimately destructive to the social order. An example of this, by the way, is Trump himself again. We bring him up again, demonising immigrants to the United States. People who want to settle there, who's demonising them by calling them rapists, thieves, murderers, and especially terrorists. A claim that is patently untrue, and a claim that is very sad, because we all know that America was a country that was settled by immigrants who contributed a great lot to the culture and to the wealth of that country. It is very similar, actually, I hate to say it, to the going back to the Second War, or before that, when Hitler was in power in Germany, demonising the Jewish race entirely. They were characterised as, again, as subhuman, dangerous, destructive to the social order of the time. A whole range of false assertions were made about their character, their physique, their ideas, all of which were basically incorrect, obviously incorrect, but unfortunately which were believed by many, many German people. And so this was an example of a group of, people, minority groups, who were conspiring to destroy the majority groups. So Trump was in fact making similar claims to Hitler. Let's move on. Many psychologists and sociologists have studied the nature and the effectiveness of conspiracy theories. The internet has got quite, if you look it up, quite a lot of articles on this topic, and they look at what it is that makes people believe them, why they become effective if they do, and there's a whole range of different views on that from psychologists and sociologists, I mean. I just want to look at, for example, because there's many I could look at, a couple of conspiracy theories of the last 50 or 60 years. I can't cover them all due to timing and space. I want to look at the Kennedy assassination, which is an example of a major, of a whole range of conspiracies, many of them coming out in books and films, etc. And I also want to look at the 2020 presidential election in the United States, because that's relevant. There's another one coming up, and we'll just have a look at what that might mean too. Let's look at the Kennedy assassination. There have been a number of quite thoroughgoing evidence-based reports on the Kennedy assassination of 1964. And one of the many of them have, the good ones, have found that the assassination was in fact performed by Lee Harvey Oswald himself, acting alone, without reference to anyone else, without a reference to another persons, any organisations. He had no affiliations between any organisations or government bodies that would, give him some sort of motive to commit this shooting. And the commission, the major commission then, was extensive. It consisted of pages and pages of evidence and interviews with experts, eyewitnesses, witnesses, government, military personnel, many, many others, a whole range of people. And the evidence, you have to say, if you look at it carefully, was very strong indeed. However, it was, however, difficult to get to Oswald himself. That I think was one of the major things, because he was killed a couple of days after he committed this crime by Jack Ruby, and so that there was no chance of the commission to interview Oswald himself. And I think that becomes a point where conspiracy theories can get into the act. However, and so what the outcome was, the commission of inquiry that was held was quite convincing. If you read it carefully, quite convincing. However, it seemed to be, and this is the problem of Oswald being killed only a couple of days after not being accessible to the commission, and the fact that the commission came up with the notion that it was Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone, without support from any group or anything else, was too much to swallow. And so it spawned a whole lot of doubt, sinister interpretations, many bizarre sort of activities. The mafia was behind it, US military leaders were behind it. Even the president at the time, the new president, Lyndon Johnson, was said to be involved in the conspiracy itself. And the effect of it was that there was in fact another investigation in 1979, and they came up with the same findings exactly as the Warren report, the one that I've mentioned before. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the name of that commission, the Warren Commission. And it came up with the same findings, that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Once again, with a very, very thorough investigation revealed the same thing as the Warren report. However, that even encouraged, I think, more conspiracy theories to come into the thing. Then we had the Soviet government being behind it at the time. The US Federal Reserve was another one that I read about. The limousine driver of the car that Kennedy and his wife were in, and the governor. Wound alterations to Kennedy's body by people. A whole range of different scenarios. Now, nearly 2,000 books have been published on the assassination conspiracy. And many polls, and even recent ones, showed that most Americans believed that Kennedy was killed by some sort of conspiracy. Not by just Lee Harvey Oswald, but a conspiracy. In 2009, a CBS News poll found that 76 of people polled believed the president had been killed as a result of a conspiracy. So there you are, even today. Thus, the Kennedy assassination remains as a conspiracy for most US citizens. Though if you read the reports of the two major commissions, the evidence is, I think, quite convincing that Oswald did act alone. In addition to the 2,000 books, there's 20 movies made on it, documentaries and movies, most of them taking on the conspiracy theory, and some of the features of conspiracy theories that have come up in those conspiracies over Kennedy's assassination are things we should be looking at. So the Kennedy conspiracy, the Kennedy assassination remains for most Americans a conspiracy, although by whom, a whole range of groups and people have been mentioned, but by whom we don't know. So the evidence for a conspiracy really by any certain group is really not there. Okay, now I just want to move on briefly to the 2020 elections in the United States because it's relevant, and I think we'll be coming up with a similar point of analysis with the 2024 election at the end of the year. Now, in the 2020 election, that Biden won, the president, Trump refused to accept the result. He argued that there was fraudulent practices going on amongst the Democratic supporters. This included a whole range of different things, an unusually high number of votes in bulk for the Democrats, which has since been proved inaccurate. The Republicans also claimed the inclusion of Democratic votes from those who were ineligible to vote, also not supported by any evidence. The use of faulty or manipulated computer voting machines favouring Democrat voters and illegally manipulating votes in favour of Biden. Now that has been examined in detail by the companies themselves, obviously, and there is no evidence that there was any faulty computers operating, that would have swung the results towards Biden. The other thing is faulty hand counting of votes to favour Biden, and Republicans claiming they were not able to get close to not able to observe properly the counting of votes. So a whole range of different theories, different ideas was presented. The focus was on what they call the swing states, where Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, Michigan, Arizona, all of which favoured Trump in the 2016 election. But most of them showed support for Biden in the 2020 election. So these were the states that Trump and his associates felt where votes were being manipulated. They presented, the Republicans and the Trump supporters, the lawyers, presented dozens of court cases of alleged fixing of the results from the means I've already explained. But there was no, most of all these cases that came to court were thrown out before they were even heard. There was no evidence for them. There were no significant frauds revealed by inquiries, or there was no corruption of voting officials or counting, and many facts show that some of these statistics that were presented to the courts by the Trump supporters were misleading and false. He claimed, for example, that in Detroit, in Michigan, there were more votes than people. In fact, the official election results show a 50% turnout in Detroit, so the claim was absolutely false. None of this deterred Trump. He still, to this day, claims fraud was rampant in the 2020 election. And there are a number of reporters and public figures that in fact support him. Normally, as I say, quite rational people, but they still talk of conspiracies. Fact checks, many fact checks have been carried out about this, and there's no frauds that have been found. The conspiracy led to a whole range of... The conspiracy led that Trump had actually won and Biden was falsely put into the presidency. This is what caused the January the 6th, 21, invasion of the US Congress by Trump supporters. 5 people died in what is now referred to as an insurrection or an insurgency, and much more damage was inflicted than was thought at the time and published at the time, as new videos appeared to show actual violence in the event, some of which was suppressed at the time. It is not totally clear whether Trump deliberately encouraged this insurrection, although many reporters and many people, experts, claim that that he did encourage it. He initially appeared to support the insurrection, that's true, but as time went by and his advisors got to work on him, and they were effective then with him, he acted to ask the people that in the right to return home peacefully. So he did that, but he did that because at the when he was president at that time, he did have some advisors who held him in check. One wonders whether there'll be any if he wins the election this time, because he's got rid of most of the people who don't agree with him. Initially, with this insurrection, if you like to call it, the media saw rioters as uncoordinated and disorganised with no plans of attack at all. Though careful video footage shows organised groups among the larger mob, if you like, there were organised groups. Many of the rioters wore military assault type uniforms, they had flagpoles, they had batons, hockey sticks, chemical spray, you name it. Some carrying plastic zip tie handcuffs, suggesting they hoped to seize elected officials and handcuff them. It appears that many militant groups were there that weren't advertised at the time, or that weren't known or weren't presented at the time. One of these militant groups is called QAnon. Fortunately, not as powerful as it once was. And its presence at that insurrection was quite obvious. Said to be a haven for conspiracy theories, QAnon has supported a bizarre range of claims and held and directed by certain groups. QAnon believed that the world is controlled by a group of malicious elites. This is clear in what they say. The group has embraced everything from baseless associations linking 5G to health risks, a child sex trafficking ring has been added and has inferences of cannibalism. They make special reference to ritual sexual abuse. They do not elaborate on what that is. So that they are a very destructive group. It has been difficult to track the leader and the leaders of the organisation, as they remain fairly anonymous. A recent video series by HBO called Q Into the Storm has claimed the leader is not a high-ranking Trump official at all, but a person named Ron Watkins, the long-time administrator of the group's online home. Watkins now lives in Japan and has said he's in retirement as the administrator. The group has been said to weaken, and its posts have sort of diminished since the Congress insurgency. However, some agree that the group has not weakened. It's strong in Germany, with connections with neo-Nazis, and it has actually some representation here in Australia, and they once again argue for the fact that Trump was the duly correctly elected president in the 2020 election. Among the protesters I just wanted to mention was a man called the Horned Man, who stormed. He wore a Viking type hat with fur, with horns, and with a fur coat, if you like. And he's been revealed since as an actor and hardcore Trump supporter, Jack Angeli. He dressed as a horn. He was the one that was dressed as the Horn Man. His bare chest showed tattoos. He carried a microphone, and he refers to himself. Angeli refers to himself as the Al-Anon shaman, and the Yellowstone Wolf is another name he uses. And he's a regular protester. He was a regular protester in his native state of Arizona, appearing in various guises, other than that of the Horned Man that he appeared in the insurrection. He is famous for making a claim in a radio interview that the coronavirus was an act of high-ranking government officials, conspiracy, who used false information to defeat Trump. In Australia, I should mention, for the information of our overseas listeners, Al-Anon has some Australian members. One of them is called, his name is Tim Stewart. He's a member of Al-Anon, and a friend of the former Australian Prime Minister, I might add, Scott Morrison. And Stewart and Morrison have been mates for 30 years, so they say, having first met at a local Baptist church in Sydney South. Morrison's wife Jenny and Stewart's wife Linnell are best friends. The Australian government had employed Linnell to assist the Prime Minister, although it was later announced that she no longer worked for the government. Now, at the time, the Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, was quiet about the PM's friendship with Stewart and members of his family, though Stewart himself was quite open about his connection with Morrison. Stewart had claimed to have influence on the Prime Minister at the time. He had a whole range of... Stewart promised that had been given on school sex education would go, disturbing information that he'd given on school sex education would go straight to Scott Morrison. Stewart boasted to friends using his Twitter persona, which is Burn Notice, under the Twitter handle at BurnSpy34, that Morrison in the apology did refer to ritual sexual abuse. This was supposedly a coded term. A coded term, and this was denied by the government at the time, by the Morrison government, and Morrison himself since distanced himself from the Al-Anon group after a report on the Four Corners program in Sydney, an ABC program, that he rejected it. Meanwhile, the Patriot Transitions Voice, PTV, a leading Al-Anon site in the US, has organised a rally in Dallas, Texas for God and Country Patriot, giving a platform to key Trump supporters, including the former Trump supporters Michael Flynn, the woman Sidney Powell, she was a leading component of the false vote count conspiracy. And at the time, Flynn argued that there should be a Myanmar-style coup in the US to restate Donald Trump, while Powell collected more funds for her pro-Trump, not for organisation defending the public. So this is going on. Later on, Stewart, the Australian person, using his Twitter name, tweeted his support for the storming of the US Capitol, in which Al-Anon adherents played a prominent role. Although he's been silenced since by most mainstream Serbia. This sort of, one can go on about this sort of goings on that have occurred here, even in this country. My overview raises a few questions of why people hold so strongly to conspiracy theories without requiring any evidence or any other form of support for what is being asserted, if you like. There are a few suggestions that I just will deal with briefly. I think I might deal with them in more detail in future blogs. It is important to aim, I think, first of all, to be accurate in the reporting and causes of social and natural crisis, if you like, and of the individual's impact upon it. Accurate reporting and investigation is very important for the media, and it takes time and it takes attention to look at the detail, to look at the facts, and unfortunately many reporters, both here and overseas, do not do this. They do not take adequate time to check information, to look at data, to look at the complexity of the facts. They don't do this. Is not done. And with conspiracies, you just make these claims, which sometimes the press just repeats without anybody looking in detail at the claims, or checking the claims, if you like. Now, I suppose that to explain something about it, why people adhere to conspiracy theories, the first thing I think would have to be said, that people do get anxious and fearful of certain things that happen. One would say, for example, that the World Trade Center attack did cause a lot of great anxiety and fear, and it was a very shocking event. I remember myself being there. A friend of mine rang me up, I think at 3 o'clock in the morning, and told me to turn on the television and look, and it was almost unbelievable, to me anyway, when I looked at it. So that people do listen in those cases of fear to assertions which may allay their fears and anxiety, so that you get people would listen to ideas such as these were attacked by aliens. That was one thing. There are attacks by China, North Korea, Iran, so on. and even by the US military itself and US agencies itself. This was strongly held in a number of countries that I have visited, and these do supply some sort of, or provide some sort of closure to the anxiety that people feel about things to come. And they feel safer by believing conspiracies. It makes them feel better, they feel safer. And so when you feel safe and when you feel you've got some sort of answer to your fears, you'll tend to stick to the theory that supports them, the comforting theory, if you like. Now, psychologists refer to a pattern of thinking which is called illusory pattern perception, and it is associated with the human brain's tendency to find patterns in a world that aren't actually there. The brain is a mysterious thing in its operation, and so our brain tends to seek, without us being involved in a sense consciously, to bring together things into a pattern that really isn't there. Somebody gives the example of a Western, in astrology, is the night sky that shows 12 patterns of the zodiac. They include animals such as the goat, Capricorn, the bull, Taurus, as well as other phenomena, twins, Gemini, and so on. And these images provide some meaning to otherwise random distribution of stars, and each sign is associated with birth dates and related personality traits, and even providing predictions of individual futures. So the brain is bringing things together in a way that resolves our anxiety and things like that. It exists in other cultures as well. The Western zodiac, such as in the Chinese zodiac, consisted of animals, each one representing specific birth years. In ancient Australia, the Australia of indigenous people, there have been numerous star signs dating back thousands of years for Aboriginal Australia. So that these sort of ideas of things having some point or some purpose or some, that takes away the anxiety of randomness, of fear. And so these sort of ideas give some sort of comfort. I'm not really suggesting that astrology is a conspiracy theory. The attribution of meaningful signs to random events is what I'm talking about. It shows a tendency of the human brain, humans, to seek order in randomness and what appears to be chaos. It seeks to resolve it almost without us doing it. And a website on mental health I read discusses the relation of illusory pattern perception to conspiracy theory. It makes the point that a study published in the European Journal of Psychology concluded that illusory pattern perception is an important cognitive factor involved in conspiracy theories. The study found both conspiratorial thinking and supernatural beliefs were strongly correlated with each other, and with a tendency to find, as I said, patterns within randomness. So seeing patterns in chaos but no pattern in structural stimuli was a predictor of irrational beliefs. Now the Trump supporters found it difficult to believe that the election was lost. And Trump, of course, encouraged this. It caused uncertainty and unexpected disorder because they did not expect this to happen. They were shocked. They were at a loss to explain it, so that they would be looking for anything that may explain the fact that Trump actually won and was defrauded from winning, by conspiratorial people. There were many reasons why the election was lost, but the reasons given why he lost were too academic, too vague, too confusing, too unacceptable. So a simple explanation of fraud was much more appealing than a complex investigation into the reasons why he lost. And there were good reasons why he lost, which have come out in the press. The idea of a malignant enemy reinforces the notion that there was a fraud, actually. And I think also you could say that the supporters, that the idea that there was some sort of conspiracy to take the election away from Trump gave everybody a sense of meaningfulness, if you like, a feeling of control, if you like, of the situation. They had a simple explanation, and all of the explanations, the actual evidence given for why the loss was made, why the loss occurred, an examination of the swing states and the election that showed that Biden did actually win the election, were ignored by people. For example, I was reading YouTube personalities, Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro, both conservative, mildly right-wing, you might say, also indicated support for a fraud conspiracy, both of them advocating that the truth eventually will come out. Well, the truth has come out, there was no fraud, but they don't tell you that. The problem with conspiracy theories, I think, is that they are very seriously destructive, and they are. The second thing is it's almost impossible, because of the support it gives those who believe it, to dispute what they believe. Rational discussion is not possible. Irrational claims are not seen as irrational. So discussion is almost impossible to dissuade them that they're, they're wrong, So it becomes important to ask whether there's anything we can do to change minds to deal with conspiracy theories. We already know how strongly they are held by those who believe them. We already know that rational discussion will not dissuade them from what they believe. Direct challenges about them do not have any impact more. The only thing we can say is that, some of them that predict dire outcomes that don't happen start to fade out, so that they lose their power. And also, some of the advocates of conspiracy theories, especially of the Trump election, of the 2020 election, have been sidelined. Fraudulent. Rudy Giuliani, a lawyer to Trump, had his law license suspended after a New York rule he made demonstrated false and misleading statements. in the 2020 election, on behalf of Trump, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Trump's press secretary, made outrageous claims as press secretary. She's been outlined and ridiculed. Donald Trump's son, Donald Jr., has made conspiratorial type statements that have been dismissed by the press. He's still making them, by the way. Probably the only thing I could say, and I have to say this with reservation, the most successful way of reducing conspiracy theories is educating people about how to look at claims and assertions as a skeptic, which is what this channel is all about. And educating people on what evidence is and how you look at evidence in relation to some sort of assertion or idea. I think also some knowledge of how science works is very helpful, although I do know people who know all about how science works, who still have some views about some conspiratorial theories about vaccines, for example. But it does help, I think, if you can educate people about the workings of science and how it evaluates any claim or any assertion that's made. And I think to sort of finish off, I think that because I have worked at a university, been a lecturer there, I think we should, in every course, deal with conspiracy theories, discuss them, and point out where they lack evidence and how they lack evidence and what evidence they need to prove them true, and the evidence that that supports that they are wrong. So I believe that that's perhaps the only answer that we get at young people, and we teach them about the workings of science. We teach them how to evaluate any claim or any assertion, and we teach them what evidence is and how evidence can support a belief or not support it at all. So I think it's sort of a vague sort of answer, a vague sort of solution, but I think that's the only way we can go. And I want to just finish by saying that taking a skeptical view of any claim or assertion is very important for evaluating that claim or assertion, and that we shouldn't accept any assertion or claim at face value, any complex assertion or claim at face value, but to guide it by evidence. I think more importantly, it should be people that work for the media, newspapers, TV, radio. They should learn a little bit more about how to check their facts before they just repeat the fraudulent claims of conspiracy theories. So thank you very much for listening. See you next video.